In 1984, we were a society of change. It was a bright, designer-led, everything with a brand on it. We could have it all and we could do it all, and we were very confident. And even though lots of us didn't like Mrs. Thatcher's politics, she certainly opened the way for lots of us to be very successful, me included.
Just cut it in a style that will be universally popular.
Certainly, madam.
Margaret Thatcher's manner, her shrill voice and her bossiness made her a popular hate figure.
It's not a very Tory-looking lobster. Well, they're Tories before they're boiled, but one hopes in politics not to get boiled.
Have you heard of Alexei Sale?
No, I haven't.
Alexei Sale, think of that name.
Is he a ballet dancer?
In 1984, I was an enormous star.
Alexei Sale.
Does he play for Queen's Park Rangers?
Is their life in Peckham? Is their life in Peckham? What's that switch over there for?
Britain was starting to become the consumer country that it is now, but there was a lot less choice.
Waiter! Waiter!
There is a huge joke in the second series of The Young Ones where Neil tries to get a coffee in a pub and Rick says, "This is a pub, Neil, they don't do coffee."
What would you like, Rick? Coffee, please, Vivian. This is a pub, they don't do coffee.
Because everybody knew that you couldn't get coffee in a pub.
I'd made my first ever money, which was quite nice. I was touring the world with Ultravox, having a ball, doing what lads do, and it was a wonderful time. But there was a definite feeling that there was something new happening, but something old dying.
But in 1984, strikes were still a fact of everyday life. The unions had massive power, and they knew how to use it. They could hold the country and governments to ransom.
The population in general was sick of striking workers, the unions holding the country to ransom, cake shops closing at 3:30. They thought, why can't I have the stuff I want?
In came the first of the flashy new entrepreneurs. You could work hard, spread wealth, and make yourself a fortune along the way.
Britain was much more polarised then than it is now. You had a lot of bitterness, particularly on the part of the new middle class and upwardly mobile working class people, towards unionisation and unionised labour. They wanted to be part of what they saw as the new Britain, which they saw Mrs. Thatcher bringing in.
For Mrs. Thatcher, the coal industry represented everything about the old Britain she hated. She saw it as inefficient, loss-making, and dominated by a union, the National Union of Mine Workers, that had the power to bring down governments. Worst of all, its leader, Arthur Scargill, was a Marxist who made no secret of his revolutionary beliefs.
And I hope that people do regard me as a dangerous man in the respect of changing society. I'm certainly a danger and a threat to those who support the capitalist system, and I'm very proud to be a threat to the capitalist system, and I hope by being a threat we're able to bring about a fundamental change in society and create a new order.
Mrs. Thatcher was fortunate in her enemies. If a Tory Prime Minister has got to find an enemy, Arthur Scargill would come straight from central casting.
Do you think you'll like Mrs. Thatcher? I've never met Mrs. Thatcher. I think it would be a more appropriate question to say, wonder if Mrs. Thatcher will like me. She couldn't dislike me, could she?
I think she saw Scargill, rightly in my view, as a Marxist thug. She didn't actually say that, but she certainly said he was a Marxist who wanted to impose Marxism on Britain regardless of their will or willingness to have it. much better suited for the Kremlin.
I want to see a socialist society in Britain. I want to see a new type of system where people own and control the means of production, distribution and exchange. I think that would be beneficial for everybody.
You could sense that a punch-up was on its way more than any other strike I can remember, that this was going to happen, because almost both sides wanted it to happen. I mean, that's what was unusual. Normally, there would be a sort of a dance, a ritual dance beforehand, but it was as if the two partners in the dance had decided they wouldn't bother with the preliminaries, they would actually get to it straight away.
In March 1984, the government announced plans to close 20 pits with 20,000 jobs. The battle had begun.
Yorkshire's 56,000 miners have been called out on strike from Monday. And as the threat of confrontation grows in the industry, the union has challenged the Coal Board to come to its senses and talk seriously over pay and pit closures.
How could you lose? I couldn't understand how you could lose, because we wasn't fighting for money, we wasn't fighting for shorter hours at the pit or more holidays. We was fighting to save villages and pits, and I can't see that anybody can lose that sort of argument.
We were living in the valleys. If the colliery closed, I'd be able to work probably for the rest of my life. I was positive 100% that we had a genuine reason for coming out to strike. It's to save our jobs.
From the outset, this strike would be different. It wasn't just about the survival of an industry. A huge clash of politics, cultures and ideas was looming. The future direction of the country was at stake.
And it was absolutely essential that this battle wasn't lost, because it was not a battle about miners, it was a battle about bringing down a political system, and it would have been disastrous to have lost.
We will do everything in our power to stop the closure of our pits, the butchery of our industry, and the sacking of our members.
This was going to be a defining moment for the nation. In essence, trade unions had been running Britain since the 60s. The country was on the flat of its back. We were being rogered ruthlessly by organised labour. And this was going to be a battle which, if it wasn't won, was literally going to send Britain back into the Dark Ages.
The British construction industry is in crisis, and pressure on the management has never been stronger.
If we do things wrong, people are going to lose their jobs.
So Chief Executive Stephen Martin has made an extraordinary decision. He's going undercover in his own company.
We just had to put up and shut up. We are second class.
He discovers the unsung heroes behind his balance sheets.
Instead of taking all the time, give a little bit. The amount of stuff I've learned is unbelievable.
And they discover who he really is.
I've got a confession to make there. I don't want to lose your knowledge and experience. I'm going to make sure you get the training that you need.
Undercover Boss, the new series, continues Thursday at 9 on 4.
Love film?
I don't think maybe's the answer I'm looking for. I think yes.
Want an easy way to rent DVDs?
Are you flirting with me?
From just $3.91 a month?
That's amazing.
Choose from over 65,000 titles online.
Did we just become best friends?
We send them, you watch them, then mail them back to us when you're finished. It's that simple.
And don't tell me it's not.
Even the postage is free.
You sure?
And there's no late fees.
Now that.
I'm not prepared to compromise my views or my principles in order to win.
Since being elected president of the Miners' Union in 1981, Arthur Scargill was idolised in the coalfields. A fiery, charismatic Marxist. There'd never been a union leader like him before.
Let's hear it for the boy.
I was renowned in Nottinghamshire for being a tremendous supporter of Scargill. I actually went out and campaigned for him. Every time that Scargill came on a platform, I were in attendance. It was like hero worship.
His conduct during and after and before the strike was absolutely bob on. It was something that me as a foot soldier wanted to follow.
Loyalty works both ways. When you've sent me in to negotiate with the board, and they turn round and ignore me.
Arthur Scargill is a fantastic public speaker, and I don't believe there's anybody better at setting a claptrap, if you know what I mean by the technical term is setting a claptrap, which is when you bring your voice to a crescendo. Like, I sound a bit like William Hague, but and you jab and the moment comes when the audience is just impelled to roar and clap.
Come and join us and fight.
Mrs. Thatcher sent in her knight. He was Ian McGregor, the chairman of the Coal Board.
The champion was a rather odd, little short, fat Scotsman who appeared to have no neck, had a rather strange half-American accent when he spoke, really wasn't used to public performances whatsoever.
Are there any circumstances whatsoever in which you'd be prepared to think again about closing those pits, or at least modify those plans?
Sir, I act on behalf of you, the taxpayers, who I think are getting a little tired of putting out so much money just to keep these mines going when you don't need them.
McGregor may have been past retirement age, but he was as tough as old boots. He'd earned the reputation as a hatchet man after cutting jobs at British Steel. Now he'd been picked by Mrs. Thatcher to tackle the coal industry.
Ian McGregor came to lunch at ITN and he just delivered, almost his plan really for how he was going to, downsize the mining industry, and he was particularly going to downsize the NUM. And it was his directness about it that shocked us, because we were kind of used to a kind of slightly shilly-shallying nationalised industry manager who would occasionally come to lunch and say, I'm sure we can sort this out, old boy, and, smoke-filled rooms, beer and sandwiches at Downing Street, all that kind of stuff. Well, no one was playing by those rules any longer.
But this was the era of the birth of spin, and McGregor had no idea how to handle the media.
Can you tell us your recollection of yesterday's incident, sir?
No.
Tim Bell, one of the first spin doctors and a favourite of Mrs. Thatcher's, was given the task of spinning McGregor.
McGregor saw the media as a rather sort of interesting new experience for himself. The media want to interview me, that'll be fun, I'll go and do it.
How do you feel the talks went?
Well, we had some talks, yes.
Completely naive.
Did you feel that any progress was made?
We exchanged views.
Gave one-word answers, the thing that the media hates. They want to have a jolly good interview. They don't want to ask a question and be told no.
Is there any timetable now for further talks direct with the NUM?
No.
And nothing new on the horizon as far as you can tell?
Not that I know of.
No, Ian McGregor was a toughie, all right, but he didn't have a public touch.
No need to ask, he's a smooth operator.
Great. It's one of the perks of the job,
There was no doubt that Arthur Scargill was charismatic, a man of his generation. TV chat show was a natural place for him to appear.
A man who a writer once described as a notorious red under Britannia's sagging bedstead. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur Scargill.
A cheeky chappie with brains.
Into a situation like this where you sort of face the public, what do you sort of sense from audiences?
There wasn't a question that he couldn't answer.
Well, usually I take the view that the audience is going to be hostile.
There wasn't a subject about which he didn't have an opinion, an irreverent opinion.
Now, what happens to the Queen in your country, by the way?
Well, we could probably find her a job in Woolworths or Marks and Spencer's, there's no problem there.
But wait a minute, there wouldn't be Woolworths or Marks and Spencer's, would there?
There would in the transition period.
He was always very careful that he was well groomed. He was very well turned out.
Mr. Scargill, and how would we like it today?
Very, very short, please. Very, very short.
But of course his hair was the problem for him.
Oh, and how's the strike going, eh? Lovely
Very,
weather for
very
standing
militant,
about.
thank you.
Yes.
I can remember, as a much younger Treasury and official, in this very macho world, seeing actually a hairbrush and a small tin of hair lacquer, and saw Arthur actually just combing his hair. And I thought, good for you to look well turned out. But I wonder if your macho lads knew you were using hairspray.
Wild boys are calling on their...
It was Scargill who pioneered the key weapon of industrial action, flying pickets. Great gangs sent around the country to shut down industry. By 1984, flying pickets were illegal, but in the 1972 miners' strike, Scargill's stormtroops forced the closure of the Saltley Coke Works near Birmingham.
They tried to break us. Looks like they'll try again.
In the face of Scargill's blitzkrieg tactics, the then Tory Prime Minister Ted Heath caved in to the miners' demands.
You cannot understate the confidence that the miners had after their previous encounters with both Tory and Labour governments. You know, they had won a straightforward fight. And I mean, the Tories under Heath had backed down spectacularly quickly when there's even the slightest whiff of gunfire. You know, after the Saltley encounters, you know, Scargill sort of walked on water to many union members.
There was quite a lot of nervousness, including on the Tory side, on the backbenches of my party, that we might not win. The last time a Tory government had taken on a big union, that Tory government had lost, and that leader had fallen. And now we had a woman, for God's sake, the first time the party had had a woman leader. Could she do what a man had failed to do?
In March 1984, 170 pits across the country employed 180,000 men. The demand for coal was declining. Many pits were no longer financially viable. But the miners still had a very special place in the nation's heart.
They were thought of as the noblest expression of the British working classes. They were thought of as heroes, and they were admired personally. There were all these legends and true stories about the bravery of mine workers, and everybody knew how horrible it was down there in the pits.
They were real men, they were rough diamonds, they were laddish. But when laddism was an attractive thing, not today when it's just sort of really naff.
They always had a sort of emotional pull on the left. The miners, it was like nurses, it was like real work. These people, they're sons of the soil. They're getting in there and digging out coal and getting their hands dirty and getting scarred, and they're big and muscly. We've got to let these guys carry on passing on these jobs to their children. And then people say, well, would you go down the mine? Oh, God, no. I'm hoping to get a job in the media somewhere, maybe in advertising, I don't know. Wouldn't go to mine, thank you very much. Union tells the miners, we'll support you if you strike, but there'll be no national ballot.
In April, the government wouldn't budge on its pit closure plan. Scargill called on all Britain's miners to join the strike. Now, there would be no turning back.
I call on behalf of the National Union on every single working miner to stop work and join the
Let's stay together, loving you weather.
The Nottinghamshire coalfields were the most productive in the country. Within days, in defiance of the law, Scargill's flying pickets arrived to persuade their Notts brothers to down tools. Local union official and Scargill loyalist Neil Greatrex was at home.
Phone went, someone from the mines telling us that we'd got 300 or so Yorkshire pickets down there, I turned to Sheila and said that this is the start of it.
So as he left home, he said, by the time I get home, we'll probably be on strike. So I just said, well, whatever, we'll get through, same as everybody else will.
Well, I went down to the mine and I went to the guy that were in charge of the pickets from Yorkshire, asked him what his intentions were. He says, it's peaceful picketing, we just want to ask your lads to support us. I thought, well, that's fair enough, it can't be no fairer than that.
Then one of Greatrex's colleagues, a disabled miner, tried to cross the picket line.
So, about 40 of them got round the car and just picked it up and turned it over. So I went to this guy from Yorkshire and said to him, I thought you reckoned this were peaceful picketing. He says, you know the game. That was his attitude to what had just happened. Our buses started turning up for work, with bringing our lads into work, and I went on every one of those buses and instructed our lads to go through the picket line, carry on working, whether them pickets were there or not.
Soon, Neil Greatrex would hold the fate of the strike in his hands. Denied their right to a national ballot, he and the Notts miners voted overwhelmingly to continue working. Within days, Nottinghamshire became a battlefield as thousands of pickets descended on the pits. But Thatcher had her own army.
About 3,000 extra police were drafted into Nottinghamshire tonight, doubling the county's normal strength. The reinforcements have come from all over Britain. They don't know when they'll be going home.
Thousands of police arrived from all over Britain to keep the pits open. Among them, London's Met Police.
It was a licence to print money for police officers. I was single, it was easy money for me. I was basically earning 2.5 to 3 times my normal salary per month. And as a result of that money, what I was able to buy out of it was my first flat.
You are next!
I bought a newer sports car, a new set of golf clubs, had 2 weeks on golfing holiday in Spain, and 2 weeks in Portugal in the new year of '85. So that's what I did with it, and had money left at the end of it.
I find it's a different world when you go up north to living down south. The people are different, the towns are different, and the attitude to life is different. And I personally always find it nice to get back down south.
It was exciting. Obviously we thought, well, this is different. We didn't expect to be doing this when we joined. There was a little bit of apprehension at first because on the mornings you paraded, you had to fill out all these forms for your next of kin, and I thought, I didn't know we was going to a war zone, you know.
Section 10 and bus.
There was an awful lot of boredom on the dispute. You wouldn't be on the picket line for the whole time you were on duty. You'd have downtime. And on occasions, you'd go and actually have a game of football with the pickets. Because they were as bored with it as we were. But for the most of the time, you'd chat with them. And then when it came to the shift coming in, you'd change your clothes. You'd then become a different person. They'd become a different person. We'd become different people. And we'd have a little argy-bargy for half an hour or an hour. A few bits thrown here and there. A bit of shouting and pushing and shoving. And then after it was all happened, we'd carry on with the game of football.
The Met spent their downtime at the sleepy town of Grantham, Mrs. Thatcher's birthplace. The arrival of the cocky boys in blue with bulging wallets brought mutual benefits all around.
Everybody went to the Black Dog in Grantham. It really was heaving in there. It was just a great place to go. because they had the nice barmaids there, and the women in Grantham seemed to enjoy us being there because, I mean, the officers had a lot of spare money with them, and they were taking them out to the pictures and for meals.
If you couldn't pull a bit of crumpet there, you couldn't pull anywhere. It was just a licence to do that. And if the only reason you didn't pull was because you didn't want to, and there weren't many that didn't want to. And women would just come from everywhere. It was, to put it crudely, one great big knocking shop.
There was another change going on in 1984. This was the year women made the headlines like never before.
Brenda Dean is the first woman to lead a major trade union. She'll take over from Bill Keyes as General Secretary of Britain's largest print union, SOGAT 82.
Diana and Margaret Thatcher were the two most important women in the country, if not the world, in a way. And very different. Diana presented a much more feminine, softer way. She was the icon that everybody looked up to. And on the other hand, Mrs. Thatcher, her politics and her way of handling people antagonised me tremendously.
Before the strike, the mining families lived a very traditional life. The men went to work, while the wives stayed at home.
I lived in quite an isolated community, and I found it very chauvinistic. And I just felt that I was never judged as a person or as a woman. I was judged on how well my children were turned out, how white my washing was on the line, you know, how was I feeding my family.
When the strike began, all that changed.
That MUN dispute would have fallen flat on its face if those women had not come out in the force that they did to support their men in the dispute.
Our women are not just helping with the men in the kitchens, they're on our picket lines fighting.
And leading the charge was Arthur Scargill's own wife.
Give a rousing welcome from Mrs. Anne Scargill.
Before the miners' strike, I wasn't a political animal. I had one daughter and I worked at the co-op. And I used to go to work, and my life evolved around my daughter and my work and my husband. And then, when the strike started, my life totally changed.
Traditionally, the toughest job, flying pickets, had been the sole preserve of the men.
I can see the pit now, over to your right.
But now, their women were doing the same. And the police were out to stop them.
Cheers and applause from supporters standing outside. Mrs. Scargill had been in custody over 10 hours as she and others were taken across the police station yard to court.
There was this policewoman here, and she said to me, she said, "Come on, get undressed." I says, "I'm not dirty, I got bath this morning." I thought she wants me to get bath, what for? She says, "I'm looking for offensive weapons and drugs." I said, "You're joking." I said, "I ain't got any offensive weapons or drugs." Anyway, I took my clothes off and turned round, and then I got dressed again. And I says, "Do you know, love, I'm old enough to be your mother?" She said, "I'm only doing my job." I says, "Yeah, love." I says, "That's what they said in Nazi Germany when they were taking Jews to be slaughtered. They were only doing the job."
I would dream about standing in the darkness in a world that had nothing in it and being able to just create things.
We want to create a world that the players would govern.
Thank you very much for your money. Keep your money dropping in the bucket.
By May, the strike was not confined to the coalfields. The rattle of the miners' bucket became a familiar sound in Britain's towns, as the miners took to the streets to raise funds for their hard-up families back home. In Birmingham, even the Sikhs came on side.
The Sikh people, believing, hard-working people. And those people who work hard for their life and they love to help them.
We had to go upstairs and to eat food with the community. They were coming around with these big urns of, well, Indian, whatever it was.
We asked them, have you ever tasted Indian food before? And they said, yes, we've been to some Indian restaurant, but it wasn't this hot.
Well, they fed us. And then we were wondering where they were coming around with a bucket of water and a ladle. We soon found out.
It was a laugh that when they say, oh, more water please, more water please.
So they had these white sheets on the room, on the floor. Well, we had to take our shoes off, didn't we? Well, after a day's picketing, you know, feet are a bit sweaty, like.
They smell sometimes and they joke to be there, but say, take them off and leave them outside.
Well, we couldn't do nothing about it, I mean, because all the boys were looking, look at these footprints. And of course, with a wanky tied on your head and all. Oh. So we got on the right one. So I got the utmost admiration for Sikhs. Oh, aye.
Students at British universities couldn't believe their luck. The strike united their loathing of Mrs. Thatcher with their love for working-class legends. For one student leader and future politician, the strike presented a vote-winning opportunity.
I was the Labour candidate for the NUS presidency, and of course student politics had always been seen as pretty esoteric and, you know, not really that important. But all of a sudden, we were part of this huge alliance. I was only 23 or something like that. Didn't know what I was doing. I had a great time. The simple question was, are you against Mrs. Thatcher and with the miners, or are you not? And if the answer was yes, I'm against her, I'm with the miners, then you had to vote for me. So, you know, so tens of thousands of students all of a sudden, oh yeah, he's the guy we want.
For many middle-class students, the miners' strike was their first chance to meet working-class heroes.
I think a lot of the excitement about the strike was about going across barriers. So we had, you know, people like me had carte blanche to go to the Rhondda Valley, to go down the mine if we wanted to go into mining families, to talk to people, to meet people that we wouldn't normally have met. They might as well have come from Mongolia. They'd only come from the Rhondda Valley.
Cambridge and Oxford. You know, they were clever people, and teachers, lecturers. I never thought in a million years I'd have met something like that. But they were all interested in the cause. They were all for us.
There were always wonderful moments when a miner would be produced, like the Savage in Brave New World, by these posh undergraduates and sort of paraded as a sort of example of this noble culture from, you know, wherever it happened to be, Yorkshire or Derbyshire or somewhere. And everybody would cluster around and shake the great man's hand.
Support for the miners may have become the height of radical chic, but students and miners made rather strange bedfellows.
One of the things that I always remember were this bunch of middle-class students, international Marxists who were fighting the revolution, as they thought. And of course the miners wanted to go to the bar for a good drink with these girls, and the girls were more interested in the political revolution, and you can imagine what happened. But, you know, these sorts of things happen. The International Marxist Group actually called it horizontal recruitment at one stage. They saw their great opportunity.
It's raining men. Hallelujah, it's raining men. Amen. I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna let myself get absolutely soaking wet.
I was having having a relationship with a miner at that time, and I remember late at night I'd be in my room just winding down, tidying up, getting ready for bed. And typically what would happen is that he would come stumbling up the street from the pub at about 11:45, and he'd rap on my window quite delicately, like this. And he'd go, "Bob, are you in there? You know, it's me." And I would open the window and he would fall through the window head first. And he would pick himself up and he'd say, "Get your clothes off, love, you know, I'm here."
When a miner came to the university, they were like this hero who could do no wrong. They'd be, you know, trying to chat up some sort of radical feminist in a boiler suit who's probably a lesbian anyway, and you know, probably pinching their bums and everything. And we'd be going, "Hang on, that's not fair. We've been trying to get off with these girls for about 3 years, and you're giving them all this attention. You'd never do that for us."
We would have missionary position sex, no frills, and then he would get up and say, "Oh, that was champion, lass, you know, time for a cup of tea." We'd have a cup of tea, and then he'd be off again. And that was the relationship. There was nothing else to the relationship. We never went anywhere. We never had anything else together apart from those times.
I think I even contemplated at one point, I wonder if I sort of got a donkey jacket and a miner's helmet, I would get off with any girl on campus.
New Britain was coming out of the closet, and gays rushed out to embrace the miners' cause.
The gays and lesbians of London, of different areas, you know, tremendous support. You know, up until then, I was afraid of gays and lesbians. I didn't know what they were, didn't know what they got up to. All I knew was it didn't seem normal to me.
There was a rumour that Tom Dryburgh, the Labour MP, the very gay Labour MP, had put up a couple of miners and had tried to interfere with them in the night and found them rushing off in great horror. But there was a kind of an attempt at a rainbow coalition between minorities of various kinds. What the miners thought of it all, I'm not quite sure.
In a London pub, Glyn Roberts was about to make a new friend.
A fella in a flowered shirt come by, and had money in his pocket like that, and he was, I didn't know, he seemed a bit effeminate. And anyway, I backed through the door, and I sat down, and he came in and sat on my lap. It frightened the life out of me.
Popular support for the strike was clear when the miners and their supporters took part in a mass rally. It brought central London to a standstill.
Thought to your son, can't lose. Can't lose. You can't lose. They might be going to work in Nottinghamshire, but you can't lose when you see as many people as that walking up a bloody road. I mean, they absolutely stopped London. Absolutely stopped London and walked right through it. And how can you lose? I thought, how can you lose? You can't lose this.
The miners were crossing barriers and making new allies. But among their own, the battle between those on strike and those continuing to work was becoming increasingly bitter. In Nottinghamshire, one-time Scargill loyalist Neil Greatrex was leading his men to work in defiance of the strike call. He and his family were paying the price.
We were called scabs everywhere we went, into town or just out of the door on the bus.
Scabs kids and scabs misses. So they targeted us at home. On a night time we had a big window, and we used to pull the settee away and trap the curtains with the settee because they were going to come and set fire to the bungalow and put bricks through the window.
The only reason that the power industry is continuing to operate is because Nottinghamshire are continuing to work and provide some coal. And I say to our lads in Notts, for God's sake, join us now and we can win that much more quickly.
My father was very much a staunch supporter of Scargill. He worshipped the ground that he walked on. and resented the fact that I was actually leading miners into work against Scargill. I used to go up to my mother's, and my father would talk to me through one of my brothers. Tell that this and tell that. He would never look at me directly and speak to me, and never speak to me directly. It was always through somebody else. Now, he died about 6 years after the dispute had finished, and never spoke to me from the day that I went to work to the day that he died.
We cannot lose this fight. More important, we will begin to roll back the years of Thatcherism. Join us in that fight, and victory will be ours.
3 months into the strike, and Arthur Scargill still had the striking miners eating out of his hands. But the one thing he didn't have was the backing of the press. At the Sun newspaper, Mrs. Thatcher's ardent tabloid supporter, the knives were out for Mr. Scargill.
The heat is on. The heat is on. The heat is on. What's on the street?
But as the strike escalated, the Sun had to deal with its own unions, the print workers.
Funnily enough, I never got on very well with the printers, really. To be truthful, I didn't like their attitude. I didn't like the fact they didn't work long hours, and I didn't like the fact that they earned a lot of money. And I didn't like the fact that every time anybody introduced a piece of technology, somebody would say, I'll tell you what, Sid, that's... we couldn't possibly do that. We couldn't possibly... the computer... Nah, that's a step too far, that. I've looked at this, and jobs will be lost. And the only way we are prepared to do this is we'll do it for double bubble, and we'll call it computer money. And actually, what we want to be paid more money for not operating the computer. And he said, well, you can't have the money and not operate the computer. You can either have the money to operate the computer, or we'll scrap the computer. But you can't... Oh, no. Now the computer has been offered up, we have got to have the money, but we can't operate the computer. And I said, well, you know, there's not much point in doing it. Yeah. No, we're going to have to talk to the managing director. It was a farce. The practices in Fleet Street were ludicrous.
It's one of the finest I've ever seen.
Kelvin Mackenzie collided head-on with the print unions in May, after Arthur Scargill addressed a rally.
The stock position.
I was there on that occasion. I remember very well the crowd moved forward and Arthur said, pause a minute.
Scargill had his hand up, Hitler style, and some bright spark came up with the headline, Mein Führer, M-I-N-E, you see. Now, at the old current bun, you know, that kind of thing, it doesn't happen too often, and therefore there's tremendous brain power. Mein Führer, bloody fantastic, Sid. What do you think? I'll tell you what, that's the finest headline I've written in the last 20 minutes. Yeah, you're right, Tom. And it's that kind of intellectual thought process which goes into making up great papers, right? So you have Mein Führer, bang, stick it on there, out it goes.
Made it look as if he was Hitler addressing the Nuremberg rally. It was absolutely scandalous.
As soon as the press room staff saw that, it started to snowball. People spoke to each other in that particular press room and said, this isn't right, this can't go out like this. This is a blatant lie. We should do something about it. And it started from there.
They come charging around the bloody corner. But yeah, brother, we're not bloody happy not very happy with this, right? What on earth it's got to do with a collection of politically motivated, nasty I had no idea. Anyway, they go down to see the management. Oh, you want to see the management? See the management. And they demand that the page is killed for political reasons. We've come out in solidarity, brothers, with the hereinafter known as the miners, and we cannot have this. And the management say, quite rightly, piss off, right? In the well-known industrial relations speak of the 80s.
But in 1984, unlike today, the print unions had the power to stop the presses, whatever the management said. Kelvin Mackenzie caved in, and the paper came out without the offending headline. or photograph.
We was in no way able to go along with them printing scurrilous lies about a leader of a trade union, because they wanted to name him and shame him, and that's the only way they could do it, by telling a lie.
As summer approached, the battle on the picket lines intensified. Violent confrontations with the police, especially London's Met, nicknamed the White Shirts, were now a regular occurrence.
These thugs, and they were mainly the white-collar police from London. They were the main aggressors. Because whenever we went to a picket line and we seen them with the white collars on, we knew there was going to be a problem there.
The worst police that we encountered were the Met Police, weren't they? Oh, they were cruel to us. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we weren't cruel to them, but they were very cruel to us. They used to round us, get us in a circle, and then keep making the circle smaller and smaller till they crushed us all together.
There was a culture, a laddish culture, on occasions a yobbish culture of what went on. But I think that was the only way to meet what we were meeting ourselves. The miners weren't playing by any set of rules, and the only way to defeat them was to cheat. But there was no option at the time but to play dirty with dirty people.
By May, almost all of Britain's mines were shut down. But Nottinghamshire kept working. The coal from its pits was keeping the country going. Flying pickets stepped up their action to shut those pits, and the police became doubly determined to stop them.
I want to break free. I want to break free.
In 1984, for a very brief period in this country, we had a national police force controlled centrally from Downing Street, effectively. And the police took it upon themselves to stop and arrest people on suspicion that they might commit a civil offence. Not a criminal offence, a civil offence, which is the equivalent of home taping or parking on a double yellow line. And anyone who looked like they might help the miners were prevented from travelling around the country.
You just come alongside with me.
Oh, well, talk here.
All right.
No, where everybody can see us. Why do you suspect us of causing a breach of the peace?
Your presence here gives me a cause to suspect that a breach of the peace will occur.
It was like being in a red state in Russia. There was no explanation to it because at every corner was a policeman. Policemen from Merseyside, from London, from all over the place. And they was telling us that we couldn't walk our own streets. They were telling us that we couldn't do things that we'd been doing all our lives.
Mr. Blair, first of all, how seriously do you take these accusations today from various parts of the country about an undercover police operation in this dispute?
Well, I take them very seriously indeed. You see, what's obviously happening is that the police are going far beyond what are their normal powers and are engaging, certainly in my view, in a form of emergency powers in stopping people going to picket.
But life still goes on.
In May, a coke plant at Orgreave in Yorkshire became the focus of some of the most violent clashes so far between the police and miners. Scargill hoped by closing Orgreave he could stop the vital supply of coke and win the strike.
I must tell you that what we've got is an attempt to substitute the rule of the mob for the rule of law. And it must not...
When you look at it, Mrs. Thatcher deployed the full resources of the state, the army, the police, the media against the miners, and made it into a civil war. No question, she saw it as a civil war. She talked about the enemy within. I used to talk to some of the miners on the picket line who said, look, we served in the last World War, and now we're the enemies within, and the anger. But to defeat the state is a big thing.
More support, Mr. Simpson, more support. Hold on, please, hold on.
we were called on to do a job by the government, and there were those, I suppose, that thought that we had to do some help with the Conservative government. They looked after us for 3 or 4 years, and now it was definitely payback time.
12 weeks into the strike, and the outcome was hanging in the balance. The miners still had much of the country behind them, despite the violence on the picket lines. Arthur Scargill had galvanised his troops into the most powerful force to threaten the government in years. He'd wanted a battle to the end, and now he was about to get it.
The big city.
Now we're in the UK. eHarmony is more than just a dating site. It's a relationship site where we match you on the deepest dimensions of compatibility, like character, intellect, and values. If you're serious about finding love, go to eharmony.co.uk and review all your matches for free.
"1984 was the year when the People's Darlings were a couple of British ice skaters. Torvill and Dean arrived home to a hero's welcome after gliding to perfect victory on the Olympic world stage. Meanwhile, the two unshakable ideologies were locked in a fight to the death. Throughout June, Scargill's pickets had been slugging it out with the police at his chosen battleground, the Orgreave Coke Works in Yorkshire. The stage was being set for the mother of all battles.
We had the numbers, we had the equipment, we had the motivation, we had the determination. And nobody was going to close those works.
I would love to see every single member of my union who's here, every single member who's on strike, and every trade unionist who's here supporting us down at the Orgreave.
Scargill was convinced that if he closed Orgreave, he could win the strike. The showdown was planned for the 18th of June.
It was going to be a battle. No doubt about that at all. We knew it was the big one.
Orgreave, as far as I'm concerned, was like Custer's last stand.
I couldn't believe how easy it was to get to Orgreave. We didn't actually have to find our way because the policeman was showing us where to go. They was pointing us, getting us in there.
We were directing cars off at Parkway and saying, come and park here, lads, and that's where to it. Which I thought was strange. When we got here, we knew why.
There was people walking all over the field. It was just like something out of the Bible. When they all come to see Christ, it was all walking to one place.
We walked across the field. When we came over the hill, I couldn't believe the sight in front of us. I've never seen as many transit vans and police in your life. It must have took them a weekend to get them all there. It was unbelievable. There were thousands and thousands of them.
That's the biggest mass of policemen I've ever seen in my life. If he was a burglar that day, he'd have had a field day, because all the police were in Orgreave.
At the first it was like a bit of a carnival atmosphere because there were that many people here from both sides. I saw people I hadn't seen for months. And we were chatting, then the police came out with the riot shields. We pushed them, they pushed us, which happened on every picket line. That were no different at all.
By 7 a.m, 4,000 miners were at Orgreave waiting for the coke lorries to arrive. Police had been expecting them. They equalled the number of pickets. When the lorries came an hour later, the miners' ranks had swelled to more than 5,000.
The police started reaching the truncheons on the riot shields that day. I'd never seen it before. And chanting like Zulus, they were psyching themselves up, you know. They were completely out of control, they'd lost plot.
As the last lorry went in, the trouble started. Pickets charged straight into the police riot shields. The first cavalry charge came a few minutes later, and it clearly worried the pickets.
I turned round with the police horse bearing down on me. The police horse knocked me to the floor and it went over the top of me. Then officers came out with shields and truncheons. One of them hit me at the back of the head and I went down. As I'm getting back up, this other police officer then got me and truncheoned me till he broke his truncheon on me. Then he dragged me through the police line.
There were many injuries on both sides. More than 100 pickets were arrested.
I saw the images on television of people, policemen fighting miners, you know, hitting them with truncheons and dragging them about and stuff. It was working class men beating up other working class men, and that was just horrible. That was the you know the UK at war with itself.
Mr. Scargill, can you tell me exactly what happened just now? All I know is that these rushed in and this guy hit me up back at head with a bloody shield and knocked me to the ground out.
He said that he was struck by a police officer, as I remember, either a riot shield or something of that sort.
He fell from that bank, slipped more than fell, and his back sort of hit the ground, and the back of his head hit what I think is an old railway sleeper.
Clements, the Assistant Chief Constable, concocted this amazing story, which was completely untrue, that I'd slipped down the bank at this point and hit my head. The only people who hit me on the head were the police in full riot gear who'd gone absolutely mad.
It reminded me something of Civil War pictures in modern dress. I thought it was pretty well appalling, frankly, that we'd come to this. And I think I felt a bit sick at that time about the state of our democracy, and inevitably it raised questions as to whether the government could prevail.
They charged with the horses, and we had to run through the villages, over gardens, into people's houses, and that's the one part of the strike that really frightened me. And the reason I was frightened was because if I had a gun, I think I would have killed some of the police on the horses. Because what they were doing, I seen men who fought in the Second World War, who came back into pits, old men in the late 50s, fought in Burma, being whacked over the head with a truncheon, because they didn't believe the police would do that to them, so they stood still. The likes of me, but younger men, ran and dived.
What was the alternative? That you allow Scargill's bully boys free range over the country to intimidate whoever they chose, and to knock seven bells out of the police if they got in their way? Well, okay, if that's the kind of society you want, that's the kind you might get. But Mrs. Thatcher decided we weren't having it, and the police did their duty.
After Orgreave, the miners were in for a tougher ride. For the first time in British history, the government had sanctioned the use of riot police in a strike. Arthur Scargill had challenged the democratic process. Now the full force of the state had been brought down on him and his men. September 1984, 6 months into the miners' strike, 3 months after the bloody Battle of Orgreaves, and the public's interest was drifting elsewhere, to a newborn baby called Harry.
It's good news, which I'm sure most of you have heard already, that our Princess of Wales has had a son. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
Scargill's defeat at Orgreave had been spectacular, but he refused to back down. To him, it wasn't just a fight about pit closures, but a much bigger battle, to bring down the government and usher in a new socialist era.
You've only got to do one thing to win this battle: to remain united and determined. And if you do that, you'll be able to say to yourselves, with pride in your eyes, that in 1984, I stood alongside my trade union, and in doing so, was able to be part and parcel of the greatest victory in trade union history.
And like her new waxwork double, Mrs. Thatcher wasn't going to budge either.
Well, I think they look perfectly all right, don't you? They look like mine. That's amazing.
You can never compromise on the right of management to manage. That you can never do in any industry.
Yes, it's the sale of the year at NCB. Just look at what we're offering. This fabulous negotiating table, never been used. Or this matching set of...
The coal board chairman, Ian McGregor, was Mrs. Thatcher's hatchet man. Strong on resolve, short on charm.
To NCB, where we've got a great deal waiting for me.
Peace talks between the two sides had been going on since May. McGregor had never been at ease with the new world of spin. Now, under great strain, his behaviour was becoming increasingly bizarre.
He rang me up and told me he was going to do it. He said, I've got a stunt, Tim. Got a little stunt I'm going to play if those catch us.
The chairman of the coal board walked into the hotel lobby with a carrier bag over his face, only his eyes protruding from the slits normally used as a handle.
I think I looked at the ground and said, please open up if this is what we've got to cope with. Heavens! Oh.
I was playing golf with a friend of mine, and somebody had to run onto the course to tell me that McGregor had done this terrible thing and put this paper bag over his head, and would I now like to try and handle this with the media? You can imagine me, can't you, ringing up the television and saying, please don't use the picture of the chairman of the coal board with a paper bag over his head. I mean, that would be a really popular suggestion, wouldn't it?
It gave the sort of, the bloody dimwits who write for The Guardian and those kinds of things, the idea of making this man out to be a fool, and I promise you, whatever else he was not a fool.
Surely compromise will have to be shown on both sides to end this strike. It's not simply a matter of asking Mr. Scargill to back down, because quite clearly he's not going to do that.
Well, that makes two of us.
The salts are in danger now.
McGregor was sidelined after the paper bag stunt, and the miners were on the ropes after Orgreave. It should have been a moment for negotiation. In September, it seemed a solution was near, but Scargill turned it down.
We really thought there was a window there that would form, perhaps not the end of the dispute, but some building in negotiation, perhaps over days or weeks. And Arthur just walked away from it. And we just felt where do we go to now?
Hello, Mr. Scargill. What a nice day it is.
I refuse to discuss that, Mr. McGregor.
Well, how about good morning?
I refuse to involve myself in any discussion regarding the well-being or otherwise of the morning.
Scargill had turned an absence of negotiation almost into a principle, if you like. Revolutionaries do not negotiate. I mean, that was the kind of... I never heard him say that, but I'm damn certain that's how he felt. Well, that's no good when you're the democratically elected leader of a trade union in a democratic country. I mean, you've got to negotiate.
I'm sorry, I'm afraid negotiations will have to stop there.
With Scargill showing no sign of backing down, Mrs. Thatcher pushed ahead with her battle plan.
Most of us just thought Maggie was a silly old woman and didn't take her seriously. Crikey, were we wrong, you know. The naivety of youth, I guess.
In fact, before the strike began, Mrs. Thatcher had been quietly hoarding coal stocks, enough to keep the country going for 2 years.
When I realised that what was happening was planned, and that Arthur Scargill was walking down a path that actually Margaret Thatcher had set for him, then I just was depressed. I just felt foolish, I felt used. And we didn't give up, far from it, but I think we knew that we had our backs against the wall then.
There was never a time where there was any risk of the lights going out. And I might say, had we not had coal in the United Kingdom to move, I would have imported coal and moved imported coal into the... And it was absolutely essential that this battle wasn't lost.
But some die-hard supporters just didn't see the light.
I was at some party and this 30-year-old anarchist told me this plan that was going to bring down the Thatcher government. He said, well, everywhere around Britain, people are all turning on their electricity at 6 o'clock. You've got to go around the house, turn on whatever electrical appliances you've got. I went, oh, right, okay. And I went around telling everyone about the 6 o'clock surge. So every day at 6 o'clock, the little alarm would go off in our house. And I'd run around and flick on the kettle, flick on the immersion heater, the fan heater, anything that's electric. I would tell electric blanket, we still got that somewhere. Plug it in, it doesn't matter if it's not in the bed, plug it in, switch it on. And so the meter was spinning round and the electricity was burning up. And I had this fantasy that Thatcher would be brought down because all the coal stocks would be used up. And I fantasised about this headline, you know, Thatcher government brought down by O'Farrell's yogurt maker.
One mistake that Mrs. Thatcher didn't make about Scargill was to underestimate Scargill. But Scargill underestimated Thatcher. He didn't have an understanding that she really was a political street fighter. And ties, score draws, not in her vocabulary.
What do we want? We don't know! When do we want it? We're not sure! Do we want a ballot?
But Scargill had made a crucial mistake. He'd called the strike without holding a national ballot, which by law he had to do. The majority of Nottinghamshire's 31,000 miners defied him and worked through the strike. One of their organisers was a rebel NUM official, Neil Greatrex.
There were times when I've tried to think of a way out of it for everybody, a solution to it. I even went on television once and I said that maybe it's time that Knots did come out to bring an end to the old strike. I think this were about 3 or 4 months into the strike. After a few phone calls the next morning from irate Yorkshire miners, you know, we scabby, we don't want you out on strike, I quickly changed my mind.
The miners' president came to Nottinghamshire as part of a growing campaign to get all the county's miners out on strike. He told a meeting of several hundred strikers they should all be on the picket lines. To prove his point, he led them to nearby Ollerton Colliery, where the police were totally unprepared for their arrival. In the confusion, scuffles broke out.
I used to feel angry, bitter, surprised that they wouldn't come out and get it over with. It'd be finished in a few weeks if this is what they'd do. But they were not having it. And we were the bad ones, not them. They were the good ones for going to work, carrying on going to work. They were the ones getting pat on back.
The basic fundamental rule of trade unionism is one man, one vote. We haven't had a national ballot. For the sake of a national ballot, it's caused all this heartache and havoc. Everybody here would be on strike if we had had a ballot and if the ballot was for strike. Without that ballot, doesn't do nothing for me, that.
I want to break free.
Labour leader Neil Kinnock the son of a miner, felt a natural sympathy with the striking miners' cause. But the lack of a ballot put him in an awkward position.
I made the biggest mistake of my political life. And the size of this one, I believe, was volcanic, devastating. And my mistake was not to have followed my instincts and in public, loudly and repeatedly, as well as in private, to have called for a democratic ballot.
Despite the abuse, in August and September, miners outside Nottinghamshire were beginning to drift back to work. The refrain was always the same.
I saw most of the people that was working daily because I was on the picket line watching them go to work. It's very easy to call people scabs. It's a horrible word. And really, I think that you don't have to call people scabs. I think that as people come towards you in the street, saw you as you walk by the pub, come by in the cars, they only had to look and know the disapproval on my own face and know full well that they felt guilty.
By October, 7 months into the strike, Arthur Scargill's position was weakening.
Arthur Scargill gets a High Court writ that could send him to prison.
Scargill was at the Labour Party conference when he received the writ. It said that without a national ballot, the strike was unlawful and opened the way for the confiscation of his union's funds. But as usual, Scargill was defiant.
The miners' union are winning this fight, and they're not only winning it for miners, they're winning it for you in the entire labour and trade union movement. The following week at the Tories' annual conference in Brighton, the working miners gave Mrs. Thatcher a PR coup.
I address this conference as a miner, a working miner, a Conservative. Or, as I'm called every day, a Tory scab.
Mrs. Thatcher was in her element, surrounded by admirers and in the middle of a good fight. Early on Thursday morning, the 12th of October, she was in her room preparing her big speech.
I was in a working suite that the Prime Minister had at the time with her and Norman Tebbit. I left the working suite, went round the corner to Alistair McAlpine's suite where he was having a party, and as I walked in the door of his suite, the inside of the hotel fell down.
The blast destroyed rooms on 3 floors of the building where the Prime Minister, her cabinet and dozens of MPs were staying. Experts believe the bomb was planted on the 5th floor. The explosion caused 3 floors to collapse. The injured were helped onto the promenade, most suffering from cuts from flying glass and masonry and shock.
When the Brighton bomb went off, my first thought was, oh God, I hope it's not the miners. But my second thought, and I'm not proud to say it, but my second thought was, God, I wish they got her.
By sheer chance, Mrs. Thatcher wasn't in her bedroom at the time.
Well, everybody thought she'd bought it. That's the first thing came to people's minds. Well, our minds, anyway. As miners on strike, she was there, and that's the first thing came to all our bloody minds. Whoop, she's gone. You know. But no. She was in the toilet.
She was awake and had just completed work on her conference speech when the bomb went off.
You hear about these atrocities, these bombs. You don't expect them to happen to you. But life must go on, as usual.
And your conference will go on.
Thank you. Will go on.
Thank you.
The morning after the explosion, Mrs. Thatcher came out fighting.
This government will not weaken. This nation will meet that challenge. Democracy will prevail.
Mrs. Thatcher seemed invincible. If the IRA had failed to destroy her with a bomb, it seemed the miners weren't going to beat her either. Nothing was going to stand in the way of her New Britain and the end of Union power.
As scientists, we are desperate to show you the kinds of things that you just don't normally.
People have been talking about the British Telecom share offer. The offer is now open. From the 20th of November.
8 months into the miners' strike, and the opportunity for millions of ordinary Brits to make a fast buck proved irresistible.
What it taught me was that she knew what she was doing. And what had happened was that the trade union working class, if I can put it that way, was right behind the miners, but the non-trade union working class, it was typified at the time in the media as Essex man, they wanted this new economy, they wanted this, privatised share owner democracy. And looking back, we were behind the times.
While millions rushed to buy into the shareholding dream, in the mining villages, the queues for the soup kitchens were reminiscent of the 30s depression. The hardship was beginning to bite, but striking families like the Jacksons were determined to tough it out.
Honest to God, I would never have said anything to my husband that would make him change his beliefs and mine as well. To me, he's everything, and I'd follow him to end the earth. To do anything for him, I would.
I'm sure, myself included, at times thought about going back to work, and I'm sure a lot of people did. There's got to be times when you've got no money, when you've got a letter coming through your door where your electricity is going to be cut off. Where, yeah, I can understand that happening everywhere. I can understand people going to bed at night and thinking, when's it going to end?
But for many, the struggle had become too much, and by November, the trickle of miners returning to work had become a flood, helped by the Coal Board's big cash incentives.
I wish I could just make you turn around and see me cry. There's so much I need to say to you, so many reasons why.
Good evening, the headlines at 6 o'clock. More than 2,000 miners gave up their strike today and returned to work.
The working miners at Maltby were, as usual, under a heavy guard. This morning, 2 more men
The Coal Board says nearly 800 more miners have gone back to work this morning, taking the total close to 3,000 in 2 days.
I remember morning after morning listening to the news, listening to the figures which were desperately hyped up by the right in the media, wondering whether we were going to win, and slowly realising that miners were returning to work, slowly realising that the dispute was being won.
In November, the unthinkable happened. A single miner broke rank at previously rock-solid Cortonwood in Yorkshire. It was Scargill's stronghold and the pit where the strike had started 8 months before. All hell broke loose.
The order to deploy support units in full riot gear, say the police, was unavoidable in the face of the size and temperament of the pickets.
The The strategy wasn't about winning public opinion, it wasn't about persuading the media, it was about getting the miners to go back to work, to give in on their strike and drift back to work with their tails between their legs, heads hung low, having failed. That, I'm afraid, is what it was about.
By daybreak, several hundred pickets were still refusing to disperse. This 4 hours after the miner had got into the colliery.
It's the chance I'm gonna take.
Now different and more shocking images were taking over the news. Not fights on picket lines, but scenes of starvation, a world away in Africa.
Thousands of wasted people are coming here for help. Many find only death.
The images we saw were just hideous, and I think it would affect anyone, any person with any kind of sensitivities at all. But I think that the main tool for getting me involved was Bob. You can't really say no to him. You know, he's an animal. And when we got together, the only thing we could do was write a song and make a record and get as many people come together on it as possible. So I think Christmas, Jingle Bells, da 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 da. Bob played me this thing. It will be snow in Ethiopia this Christmas. Yeah, okay, play it again. And he played it and it was completely different. And my big contribution was changing "and there won't be snow in Ethiopia this Christmas" to Africa, which scans. Bob's got no sense of time and it's dreadful.
And there won't be snow in Africa this Christmas time.
And just at the very end of the song, Bob said, we needed an anthem. We needed to finish on this big rousing thing. And one of us, the two of us, either of us, I don't know, I can't remember, came up with this "Feed the World." And we started singing that. And of course, that made the song. We had only 24 hours to do it all, mixed the record, because we had to have it at the pressing plants by 8 o'clock next morning in order to get it out in time for Christmas.
Britain's best-selling record this week, and also the fastest-selling record ever. It's Band Aid and Do They Know It's Christmas. Till next week. Good night.
Band-Aid is quite symbolic in that it was a new sort of politics, I think. The miners' strike was the last sort of dying gasp of old-fashioned, organised union sort of activism. And in the same year we had this new sort of politics, a celebrity appearing on the television saying, send in your money for these children in Africa, a more sort of global sort of appeal.
But don't forget, there are millions dying, and that's the terrible thing.
Yes, indeed.
That was the sort of way that politics, I think, was heading, celebrity-based rather than class-based.
I was a miner, I was a docker.
But the miners' strike was class-based, and the strikers weren't interested in celebrity. They preferred the tunes of political diehards like Billy Bragg, even though the cream of Britain's pop celebrities performed for their benefit.
One night we had Wham, the biggest band in the world at that time. And so it was fantastic. Wham, doing, you can go and see bloody Billy Bragg or Burwell or anytime, me or anytime you want. And a section of the audience booed them because they were miming, because we don't want to hear these pop groups miming. What they were really saying was, we don't want the #1 band in the world.
Wake me up before you go. I don't want
we don't want to appeal to the wider community. Because we don't like Wham, because they've got they're wearing shorts and got highlights in their hair and they're wearing makeup, and we don't like this.
After 9 months of hardship, the strikers who remained on the picket lines did their best to enter the Christmas spirit.
Today, the feeling of goodwill even extended to the statutory shouts as fellow NUM members went into work.
All the way from Greenland.
The lengthy strike was even taking its toll on the miners' leader and his family.
Arthur spent a lot of time away in the strike. We didn't see a lot of him at all. He did really, really work hard. And he saw his class and he fought for his class. And he sacrificed. Actually, he sacrificed his family for his class.
The Welsh taxi driver killed taking a miner to work.
As the solidarity broke down, miner turned on miner, with tragic results. There was widespread outrage after strikers dropped a concrete block onto a taxi carrying working miners to their pit. The miner survived, but the driver was killed.
It was a accident. I think the public opinion went down, and which is obvious it's going to go down. When there's a life being lost like that.
Attacks on working miners, many in their own homes, reached a new pitch of frenzy. Mrs. Thatcher's ardent supporter, Sun editor Kelvin Mackenzie, saw the hand of revolutionaries at work. He decided to send in his own agent to unmask them.
So if we put somebody in as a miner, into the miner's side anyway, you can actually get the real sense of what's happening in a dispute.
Kelvin ordered Sun reporter Richard Ellis to go undercover amongst the strikers.
I remember distinctly him marching up and down in his office. He couldn't keep still, could never keep still, particularly when he was doing something like this. He'd be marching back and forth, saying, got to do this, got to get into them, got to infiltrate these, we've got to show them.
Two previous attempts by the Sun to infiltrate the miners had failed. So Richard changed his identity, grew a beard, became an unemployed labourer, and joined the Socialist Workers' Party. After a few weeks, he was sent to a picket line in Lancashire. What he found showed that the miners didn't need any incitement from the far left.
It was eye-opening, absolutely eye-opening and quite frightening.
Here the strikers have devised new tactics, Operation Surveillance. A posse of cars is waiting to tail and spot the working miners.
What became obvious after a few days there, that they had organised themselves into small kind of hit squads, not flying pickets, but more flying attackers.
It's imperative that we don't blow our cover on this first leg, because up to now we've spotted 4 scabs and 4 scabs who we can name.
They would target those people who had either gone back to work or were shaky, preparing to go back to work. And they would literally go and intimidate or beat up that person to stop that. They didn't need left-wingers from London to do that. They were perfectly capable of doing it themselves.
This is a coward's way, innit? This is a coward's way. Why don't you come and beat fellas up in daylight?
Not
one at a time, one man to one man.
How many?
Not like it's been up bloody telly this morning where 6 men broke into a blockhouse and braiding with breeding sticks.
The miners' leader launched his own vicious verbal attack on the strikebreakers. Much of the worst violence was focused on the working miners' leaders and their families.
We had loads of threats. We had threats on Colette's life, which for anyone that's got kiddies knows that's not nice. Then one day in particular I remember Colette came through to the kitchen and said, "Mum, there's loads of people, loads of men on the lane."
Got a phone call from one of the neighbours saying that there were about 80 or so pickets outside our house.
I put my girls into the kitchen with the dog because I knew that nobody'd get through the door with the dog. And I'm getting a bit shaky talking about this, aren't I? I can feel it. And I stayed in the hallway to the door where the pickets was outside. And I knew that they wouldn't get past me either.
My first thoughts were, Sheila and the kids is in there. So I ran out through the picket gates, right through the picket lines again.
I saw our car pulling into the drive. I didn't know at the time, but one of our neighbours had rung down to the pit, told me what was happening, which I never thought to do. And he came up the lane, and because they wouldn't move, there were quite a few of them come down on the bonnet of the car into the drive.
I got a small Escort at the time. I drive a Range Rover now, and I've prayed to God many a time that I'd got that Range Rover then, because I'd have got a dozen of the swines on the bonnet, and they deserved it. They were terrorising 2 young kids in ours, and my wife.
Time can never mend the careless whispers.
The Greatrex's experience was familiar to Richard Ellis, the Sun's undercover reporter. He'd been on picket lines in Lancashire for 5 weeks and kept his real identity a secret. Then one evening, he was told to get into a minibus with other pickets.
I was ushered towards the back of the minibus. Instead of starting the engine, the leader of our group sat behind the wheel and motioned to the others to lock the doors, which they did. And it was that point I started thinking this was slightly strange. And I remember he just turned his head round and stared at me, and everyone was looking at me suddenly. And he asked a question. We have information that you are not who you say you are, that you are a reporter from the Sun newspaper. And it was the moment, obviously, I had always dreaded. And it was pretty uncomfortable. The next 20 minutes was full-on, non-stop questioning and re-questioning of my story. They decided they would have a vote as to whether to let me go or whether to take me to this regional NUM HQ where they said people were waiting for me. And they made it clear that what would happen to me was that I would be taken around the back and beaten up badly, if not killed, frankly. There were 9 of them. I won it 5-4 to let me go.
Richard Ellis fled back to the Sun's London offices and his editor, Kelvin Mackenzie.
Kelvin was bouncing up and down and loved it, wanted it there, then, right, start writing. He virtually dictated the intro to me, which was something, I've just spent the most terrifying 5 weeks of my life, and just carry on from there, he said. And so I did.
Richard Ellis revealed the violence of the hit squads, but it didn't deter men from returning to work. By the end of January 1985, half the workforce, 80,000 miners, had gone back. The strike was crumbling.
All that he is. And somehow the impossible happened.
In March 1985, In March 1985, nearly a year into the strike, the end was in sight.
You just walk away from me when all I can do is watch you leave.
So far, South Wales had remained rock solid. But at one pit, Mardy, the miners salvaged honour out of defeat and marched back with their heads held high.
So take a look at me now.
Well, going back was not a good thing. I mean, we knew we lost the strike. We marched back, like, together, in unison, like, you know, which you had to do, which was a good thing to do.
Very emotional this morning, Brian. But it's a good thing, I think, if you come back just for the sake of the unity.
So take a look at me now.
I just felt sick. I mean, you don't march back to work after defeat like we did. It was terrible defeat. You march out. You never march back in unless you win.
You coming back to me is against the odds, and that's what I've got to face.
What I remember feeling, I feel very emotional about this, was that strength of community, that wartime sense of togetherness which existed in working class communities, its strength was really broken by the miners' strike, except these people from Mardy who just didn't give in. I cried my eyes out. I'm crying now.
The men of Mardy went back to work without consulting Arthur Scargill. Their action made his defeat inevitable.
I'd turn on the telly on this Sunday morning and watch Dad's Army. So I sat there watching Captain Mannering and Corporal Jones running around, and this subtitle came up on the screen.
You're going in for water. Now Fraser takes the log out from the boathouse into the open river.
The characters carried on trotting out their catchphrases, and the studio audience carried on laughing. And I remember thinking, how can you laugh? How can you keep farting around in that church hall in those costumes after what's happened? And it just seemed so pathetic that it was announced this way on this programme that showed a vision of a completely different England, which now I felt had the heart ripped out of it.
So they called for Mr. Scargill, and out he came.
The strike itself will be over on Tuesday and there'll be a discipline vote.
I sat there looking at the television screen and I was heartbroken, couldn't believe this, and I just turned round to one of my sons. It's over, it's finished. I didn't want it to be finished.
I'm very glad now that they can go back.
What is your
very
own
glad
view?
indeed.
It never really ended. It wasn't as it was the end for a lot of people that they went back to work. That didn't happen for us because it still carried on, the verbal abuse.
It was a civil war, and it ended with the winners, many of us, feeling a bit embarrassed about the victory and about the way we'd won, and with the losers feeling humiliated by the way they'd lost, and with an awful lot of people preferring just to drop the subject.
1984 for me is the year that this country was at war, and There were police against pickets, terrible battles going on, pitched battles going on in the industrial heartlands of Britain. And yet for many people, the main event of that year was Torval Dean doing that lovely dance on the ice. And, you'd have people go, oh, I love that, I'm going to buy Bolero. Oh, I love it when they spin round to that Bolero, it's fantastic. And I thought, wow, that's the big event of the year, isn't it? Yep, Torval and bloody Dean.
Down south, the young men and women of the city celebrated the new economy.
I'm making more money now, yeah.
How about you?
Yes, I'm making more money too.
Much more? Or?
Much more than I used to, yes.
In future, Britain's wealth would come from services. Old, unprofitable, unionised industries like coal had no place in Mrs. Thatcher's new world.
The miners' strike is an absolutely seminal moment in British history. It absolutely has changed the way that we live in our society. The miners' strike is the seminal moment at which the left lost and the right won.
Just after the strike had finished, I remember one man saying to me, "Anne, I want my wife back." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Where was she gone?" He says, "No, I want my wife back." He said, "I don't want her, I want one I had before." I said, "No, them days have gone."
Pubs have been knocked down, the churches have closed, the shops have been closed. And they're closing them down one by one. And there's nothing at all here.
People like me are bitter because of the threats that were made to us kids and to us families. From people that you know as well, who now think that you shouldn't let bygones be bygones. Well, I see people in hell before I let bygones be bygones, what they put my kids through and what they put my wife through.
Ravel, Bolero. It's like a dentist drill going right through you. In a sense, of course, it was analogous to the miners' strike, because it did build quietly. It got to a crescendo that produced a kind of seizure. Scargill's Bolero, not performed with the grace, the elegance, or the success of Torval Dean.
Reenacting the Battle of Orgreave at 12:15 as Moorforce Strike Night continues to mark 25 years since this important clash between miners and police. Next tonight, award-winning director Ken Loach shares his footage of the times in the award-winning documentary Which Side